I want you guys to understand, I am really trying to make my reviews more professional. I'm trying to script them out and kind of do all this pre-production and all that kind of stuff so that I can get, a nice, concise, non-rambly review out. Tinkering with it, making sure there's a perfect ratio of informative review to dumb goof that I just want to kind of throw in. But then there's games like Mars Underground where I don't feel like I can very concisely and very succinctly put my thoughts together. And thus, here I am, sitting just in front of a microphone, ready to just ramble and just go through all the things. Hello everyone in the ATEBIT Nation, let's start the review. Let's talk about the presentation, because it's the easiest, let's be honest. So, the way this game looks, it's pretty simple. It is your standard RPG, very pixely, text box at the bottom, well put together, there's lots of environments, and they essentially make this kind of pixely RPG open world as much as they can, and I think they do a generally good job of it. A nice blank canvas for which they can paint their story and their gameplay onto. As for the music, which obviously I'm a little bit more enthusiastic about because I make music, including the music that's under this review, it's pretty good. I mean, it's a chiptune soundtrack, which is always something that I do love. The only question I suppose I have about that is, why is the bus music so intense? Like, I mean, we're commuting. It isn't speed. Like, what are you doing? But now that we've moved on from the easy part, let's go to the entire other part of the review, which is story and gameplay. It starts off kind of weird by taking you through this default day, which is essentially like a cutscene, except, every so often you have to click confirm because, you have to do the dialogue options, of which they don't really give you any. It's a weird start, but I suppose it is kind of laying the groundwork of here's where things are located, here's what your, quote-unquote normal day looks like, and at the end you see a therapist and a given medication, and that medication leads to a Groundhog Day-esque repeat of that day, and you're repeating through that day throughout the entire game. The best answer I can have for why this happens, and I suppose this is kind of, why the entire game happens, because I don't do a great job of explaining it in the endings of the game, which we will get into. Seemingly your medication gives you permanent psychosis, which is in all caps, which, that's a bit underwhelming, because that is to, narrative exposition what the she believed he lied meme was to poetry. Like, it's just like, oh, that's kind of a little ham-fisted. But you go into your new day, you get control over your movement, and if you're anything like me, you get the guy hit by a car, which triggers the first, let's call them loop closes, because this is a game that has multiple endings, and I also want to talk about, like, the true ending, I guess. Actually, maybe I should just call it the true ending. I don't know, whatever. The reason that I call them loop closes is that once you have closed a loop in some way the first time, they will then take you to this, mysterious, Twin Peaks dream kind of area where they'll throw all this meta stuff at you, saying like, oh, here's an item that you have to charge to 100% to use in a way with a person, keeping it as spoiler free as I can, because I actually want to discuss some of the endings and stuff. Yeah, they just say in order to charge it up, you have to close the loop. The problem that I have with this is that the first way that I died, and like the first 4 other ways that I died, were involving death. And you can already kind of see what my personal issue with this is. And I will say it is kind of a personal issue, is that I very much like structure. So, if you're okay with things being a bit unstructured, maybe this might be a little bit more up your alley than I found it. But saying something like, close the loop, there's, that little gap of information that you can fill in with, oh, you mean death. And then that kind of becomes awkward because then you're just like sitting on the beach going, why can't I walk into the sea? You know, I've watched enough Final Destination, 1,000 Ways to Die. I know how this should work. Because you don't know that, that becomes a little bit difficult. For the early game, I had issues because I didn't have all the kind of options open that let you kind of go around to different places at different times. That is imperatives to some of these loop closes. And I very much feel that the early game was a good chunk of why I don't love this game, because there isn't enough like structure and support and understanding of what's going on that you can follow stuff, and that leads to a whole bunch of issues of like, oh, I'm 99% to doing this, you know, one task where I have to get someone some money, but because of that 1%, it doesn't work, and it isn't until you've played a lot more of the game that you understand the mechanics of how you're supposed to, you know, bridge that gap. So speaking of the mid-game, when you do get to the mid-game, I actually think that's probably the best part of the game, because you have enough of an understanding that you can kind of work your way through the logic. You know, which is always the challenge with a puzzle game. It's all about, you know, here's where I think things should be going, here's where the developers think things should be going, and how do I get over there? So one thing that does help is that there is a hint system, albeit one that I accidentally turned off, because I was like, I understand how to do this thing, and it was just like, well, if you don't need any hints ever. So I was a little bit annoyed about that. There are other ways that can sort of help. There's a character that you can meet that will kind of tell you, here's what will happen at the end of this loop close, and that's helpful, but it's not quite as helpful because, you know, once again, it's bridging the gap of like where you are and where you think you should be going versus where you're supposed to be going. And the fact that this game is surreal, you know, like some of the time that doesn't help. I don't know, some of these endings, like, the thing is, all these endings are great, it's just, and that's what I definitely will cop to the fact that, you know, after playing it, now that I have played it, I'm like, oh, that ending was so cool, and that was so smart that you had to do that thing. But the thing is, you know, this is a puzzle game, so, you know, you always kind of feel like that, you always feel like, oh, that was so smart after you've solved it. But whether or not it's the game has done enough to lead you into that is a different question. But here's where we get to the part where I have to talk about like the proper endings of the game. I will basically keep it spoiler free, but yeah. Because the thing is, the endings revealed a pretty big issue that I have with this game, which is, as I said at the start, you have to charge this thing to 100%. So I put a lot of work in, and, you know, 1 or 2 trips to the walkthrough to get myself through that. You know, I didn't have my hints, give me a break. And eventually I charged it up to 116, and I was like, oh boy, let's go do the thing. I know exactly how to do this. I ended up doing it, and I was very surprised by how abrupt the ending was. You know, I went to start writing my review, came back and was like, maybe I'll play a new game, clicked on new game, and it started the same game. And I was very confused. I was like, well, didn't this end? Didn't I specifically do the thing you told me to do? And as it would turn out, after once again going back to walkthroughs, I would realize that, oh no, you actually have to charge it to 200%, and there is no explanation of that in the game. And that's kind of, you know, the part where I was just like, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back of, like, here's the thing, they have given us story, they have given us instruction, but the problem is that this is a game that is so surreal and so meta that there's very little things that I actually like trust, and there's very few things that actually feel like they're imparting information to the player. You know, I mean, you know, well, you know how, like, story, yeah, it's imparted to playing, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. The only instruction that was given to me was get this to 100%, and then it just didn't adhere to that. And that just kind of messed with me a little bit too much to, like, understand that what little instruction has been given to me that hasn't, kind of felt like, oh, is this supposed to be some kind of meta psych out kind of thing, to find that it isn't properly the extent of the game, that's a little bit too much for me. In fact, like, partway through the game, I actually remember, I didn't make any notes on this, but the game crashed. And I actually kind of sat there for like a minute going, is it coming back? Is this a fake out? I was kind of like, oh, what does this all mean? But it could have literally just been a crash. Like, that's the problem with, games that either have a bug or have this very meta narrative, is when things break, like, it's hard to tell the difference between something breaking and something going wrong and something not making any sense and, oh, you just don't get it kind of thing. And that kind of summarizes, like, my main issues with this game. Like, generally, I think it's very good. I think it's very interesting. I think, all these, like, loot close things are just, like, really weird, interesting little, self-contained narratives. I would have liked this big, overarching narrative to make sense to me. Maybe that's reserved for the super, super far down the line endings. Like, I've read stuff that's like, oh, you have to redo the game and the game will tell you how you're wasting your time playing this game. And I'm like, that's not great. That's not really, I'm someone who's very time conscious. I don't want a game to be mocking me for playing it. I definitely feel like what I played was good at the time, but like, as someone who really likes a full narrative, it was a bit anemic, and in terms of gameplay, I would have liked a little bit more instruction. If nothing else, to be like, wait, is that the end? Like, it literally just like cut off, and I was just like, oh, I guess it's over. Anyway, all that stuff aside, you should like look into this game. Maybe it'll be a bit more up your alley than I found it. Thank you guys so much for watching, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, I should say, for watching. We're going to have another review coming out soon, so please subscribe so you'll get to see that. Please like and comment if you would like to, and if you would like to support the 8-Bit Collective, including not only the video production, but also the podcast work, please donate to the 8-Bit Patreon. There'll be a link down there, probably, and you have that in the upload defaults. But otherwise, I will see you guys very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.